to the Plug in Play podcast. I am your host, Henry, and welcome to your checkpoint for video game news, reviews, and hot takes that nobody asked for. We've got a lot to talk about this episode. We're finally back from that after holiday lull. You know, everybody does their Game of the Year episode. I did that. You know, maybe a good preview for 2026 because there's just no news. But now it's been enough weeks. There is news. So we have the Switch 2 apparently sold horrifically. Absolutely garbage sales over the holiday season. We'll get into that. We have Ubisoft closing another studio, but this time it's weeks after they unionized. Sounds very Ubisoft-y. We have Larian talking about AI usage. So another great AI topic. Those are always very level-headed and understandable and on all fronts. And then, of course, the big topic of the week, Facebook or Meta. It's hard for me to change my old habits, but Meta closing several of its big VR studios, signaling a massive pivot away from literally the thing they named their company after. So we'll be getting into that. And of course, Impressions is a very interesting one, as I always say. But this one actually is kind of interesting. It's Death Stranding 2. Got through Death Stranding 2 very recently, and I'm willing to talk about it. My opinions may surprise you. As a big Kojima head, what did I really think? Maybe a little bit more middling than you may expect. But before we get into that, why don't you give us a like, a review, a comment, whatever you want, really, wherever you want. You know, we're on Spotify, we're on Apple Podcasts, we're now on, of course, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, or X, whatever you prefer, all under the name Plug in Play Pod 1. If you want to be a part of the show, you can even email us at pluginplaypodcast1@gmail.com. Or you can just leave a comment on any of our socials. It's kind of where we get most of our comment corner comments now, which is becoming one of my favorite parts of the show, interacting with the audience and, you know, having a conversation. So I love that. So please leave us a comment on anything you see. I'll be happy to read it on the show, and you can be featured. You can talk with me, kind of, in a one-way, one-sided kind of debate, in a way, I guess, if you really want to call it that. And then, of course, in the description while you're down there, if you wanted to get that email address and send me a comment or whatever the frick, you can also see that there's timestamps down there. That's a labor of love. If you like something I'm saying, you want to hear it faster, get to it really quick, you can click on a timestamp and you can just hear that immediately. It's amazing. Or if you hate something I'm saying, if you say, I hate that, I can't stand listening to it anymore, well, then you can just skip it. Timestamps are beautiful. They're one of the best tools that God has given us in the modern age of podcasting, where people just won't shut up. So I totally get it. So I think that's all of our housekeeping. So how's your year going? Hey, well, what's up? What's going on? It's been a slow start for me over here at the Plug and Play podcast. We are doing a few things. I have spent a lot of time. I guess that's not true. So I have been working on the podcast specifically. We are officially pivoting away from the AI faces in the shorts. I should say that. It's very interesting how that came about. If you don't care about this, I understand it's not video game related, it's creator related. But I always think those conversations are kind of interesting when I hear people talk about it. So, but a lot of people, okay, so I guess if you don't know, I do shorts to try and promote the podcast, to try and get eyes on it, and it hasn't really worked. But, you know, we're trying. And I've used an AI tool called HeyGen AI, and it essentially takes a clip of audio from the podcast, and I give it a face, and I gave it the face of a traditional gamer nerd, according to ChatGPT, which is like a fat, middle-aged man, a white man. I love it. I was like, I identify with this creature, and so I made him my avatar. And it just basically takes the audio and it makes it look like a real person is talking. Now, it of course looks like AI, but I was just kind of trying to get the podcast out there. I didn't really care about the quality. Like, I have a job, you know, like I got other stuff going on in life. So this was not my main focus by any means. So I was just trying to find something to quickly and easily get a short out there and just call it a day. And a lot of comments, in fact, the vast majority of comments were like, I freaking hate this. I hate you. I had many people just telling me to kill myself because I was using AI in any capacity. And I always justified it as, hey, look, I'm not like, what is your problem with AI? Most people would say, well, it's taking human ideas. It's, blah, 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 blah. It's like, okay, well, I'm not doing that. I generated a human face. That's not taking somebody's ideas. And I'm just using it as basically like a VTuber model would. I'm just using it to basically replace my face on the internet. I don't want my face out there. So I'd rather just a generic AI thing, and I'm trying to give you visualization, and the only way that the quickest and easiest way I could do that was AI. So be it. That's just kind of how I settled on it. And people were like, honestly, I think, and it was not the dozens, and I mean dozens of people that have commented and told me I suck because I'm using AI that convinced me to stop using it. It was the literal 2 people that went in my comments and was like, hey man, look, I actually genuinely appreciate what you're trying to do here. I think your clips are fine, but I think AI is really hurting you. I think people are really going to, and I admittedly, like, all of my clips had more downvotes than upvotes, so it's like, it kind of makes sense. But like, they're like, look, I think it's really hurting you. I think this could really benefit you if you found a way around it. Just put like gameplay in the background or something weird. I don't care. Literally anything other than AI, and I think that these clips would be far more well received. And I'm like, okay, like, fine. I don't know what it is about me. I don't know what it says about me. It's always been something for as long as I've been alive. I don't really receive negative criticism well. There's definitely ways that you can encourage people to do things, like in the military or in football. It's always like it's like being mean to people is like the incentive you're giving them to respond and do what you want. I've always been the type of person that, like, if you want me to do something for you, if you want me to work hard for you, or if you want to see results, I would much rather you be nice to me. And if you're going to convince me of something, and which is why I've never understood how this is something people think is a good idea online. I mean, this is kind of a totally sidestep, but like, on the internet, you only see people talk in horrific terms, like absolutely vitriolic, very aggressive. Can't believe you agree with this. I can't believe you think this way. You're stupid. I hate you. And I'm always like, I don't think you're going to convince that person to be different. There is, at least from my perspective, if somebody was like, I freaking hate you, you suck, you should stop doing what you're doing, I'm not going to listen to them. That person's being mean. Like, I don't like that. But if somebody's like, hey, I want you to think about this, like, maybe what you're doing could be improved. Maybe what you're doing is not right. And like, I still don't think, I think that probably if I could find a way to do it AI easier, sure. I think, like, still the environmental impacts is something, even though I think is still kind of overblown in a lot of ways, is still a concern. And I would like to kind of avoid that if possible. And I would rather have like a personal touch into my videos than AI. But I thought I was putting enough of, it's really just a marketing tool. Like, it really wasn't meant to be anything crazy, so, or like a real personal expression of myself, like the podcast was. And really, the AI was just kind of a medium to get the podcast to other people. So it was never a really big deal to me, but like, I understand that to other people, and to me, even myself personally, I probably would prefer to get around that. And so I did. I looked into ways I could otherwise. Currently, I'm using like a very cheap, JPEG, and I decided to basically make a PNG tuber because it's basically the literal same thing I was doing, just not using AI. And if anything, I honestly think it's even cheaper and like worse looking. But I think that people on the internet have just come to accept PNG tubers, which, if you don't know what a PNG tuber is, basically if you just have an image and it just bobs up and down when you're talking. Like, that's it. And so I've commissioned an artist to make me a PNG tuber avatar, and I'll be using that moving forward once that commission is done. And I've now started using gameplay. I'm just ripping trailers from YouTube and I'm putting them in my shorts and I'm just talking over them. I really like it now because it is a lot more visually stimulating. I would watch a full short just because of the visual stimulation of the trailer, but also because the AI that I was using required me to restrict it down to 30 seconds, and it's so difficult to get a full thought out in 30 seconds. And now that I'm not restricted to that anymore, I can do a clip that's 3 minutes. Like the limit on a lot of shorts for most platforms is 3 minutes long. So it allows me as a podcaster to really get a full thought out. And ever since I've only been doing it for about a week up to this point, reception's been way better. It hasn't been as negative. Comments have gone way down though. I used to log into freaking any social media platform and it'd be like, you got 3 new comments, but like all of them would be like somebody saying I was AI and I needed to kill myself. So like it was never a good thing, but like occasionally I would get a good comment, but and I'm about to read one of those out, by the way. But I just wanted to break that down. That's where I'm at with the podcast right now. I've been putting a lot of time into that, figuring that out, learning that PNG's tuber stuff, how to edit videos in that way, and I'm very pleased with the output. So, if you aren't following me on the socials, if you'd like to see these clips, you can check them out. If you're listening to the podcast, you're getting it. You're already getting it. It's really nothing different. It's the same exact thing. It's just got a different backdrop. So I'm not really editing it as much as I was with the other shorts because I didn't have to cut them down so heavily. But I think it's a good step in the right direction. I'm hopefully going to automate it a little bit more to make it a little bit more simple now that I know how to do it. So look forward to that in the future, or don't. It just is what it is right now. So moving on, talking about comments. We got the comment corner. It's my favorite new thing with the podcast. Everybody loves the comment corner. It's where I go through the comments or any replies that I got from you guys on the socials, and I will read it out and I will respond to it here on the podcast. I am no coward. I will take you on right now. So this one comes from our YouTube Shorts comments. It's at ANG capital RY Gohan at YouTube. So Angry Gohan or Ang Rai Gohan. I'm just gonna call him Angry Gohan. Love it. His also worth noting. His profile picture is Femshep, is the female shepherd from Mass Effect. I find that interesting because of his comment. But his comment states, and this is in response to the short that I posted that was about Claire Obscure. And I said, Claire Obscure, look, it's getting a lot of hate, but I think it deserves a lot of awards. And this guy, I don't agree with this first half, but let him cook, okay? Let's let him cook here, because I kind of get in with it. I can kind of dig what he's saying, okay? So he says, it absolutely did not deserve RPG of the Year, nor did it or Monster Hunter Wilds even be in the category. And that's how he said it. So already I'm like, whoa, what are you getting at here, brother? Brother, let's hold up, all right? It's not an RPG? What the frick are you talking about? Of course it's an RPG. Wait, he has more to say. The term has been bastardized to oblivion. Neither of those games have any roleplay. Expedition 33 is textbook JRPG, which are notorious for having no agency over the characters except the endings. Basically, the roleplay in its name is a complete lie. Okay. Very angry here. So that you can almost kind of see why the Femshep avatar is like kind of appropriate, because this guy's like a legit RPG aficionado. Man, really tripped. Oh my gosh. Need to drink some water or something. I may be dehydrated. My brain's on the fritz. But this guy's a JRPG or an RPG aficionado, specifically the term RPG, which I've always kind of been a little confused how we've gotten down the path of just saying basically everything's an RPG. So RPG, for those who don't know, stands for role-playing game. What is a role-playing game? Well, it comes from Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeons and Dragons is kind of the OG role-playing game. Well, what is a role-playing game? Well, it's where you take a role. It's where you impersonate something. It's where you kind of insert yourself into another character of sorts and live as they would, per se. It's you pretending to be somebody else, right? And what essentially we eventually termed as RPG is and I mean this, I looked this up as a kid a long time ago. I was like, I don't understand this because I used to think I had an idea of what RPG was, and I don't think I understand it anymore. And so I had to go on like this big soul searching Google search of like, what the frick is an RPG? And essentially, because I remember the moment that I was like, what the frick are we doing here? Was when Borderlands was like an RPG. I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. This is so far outside of what I have learned is a JR or an RPG. I'm used to like Japanese role-playing games being an RPG, or something like a Baldur's Gate or something was an RPG. What are we saying? Borderlands is an RPG? I don't understand this. Basically, the internet and the gaming industry at large deemed if you level up in a game, it's an RPG. Doesn't matter what else is going on in the game. If you level up, it's an RPG. Guess what games don't have freaking leveling up in them now? Like every game ever has leveling up in it now. It is so rare to see a game that has no form of leveling up, because leveling up is an inherently satisfying progression tool in any video game. You can take any game, literally any game. If you put a level up mechanic in it, I'll be like, cool, this game is 10 times better. Like Ratchet and Clank, when they were like, yeah, the guns, they level up now. I'm like, this is now 15 times better than the last game because you now have level upable guns. That's crazy. Like, I personally have just gone with it. Like, over the last several decades, I've just kind of been like, yeah, sure. Yeah, Borderlands is an RPG, whatever. It seems like we've just landed on if you can level up, you're an RPG. So like, I understand Angry Gohan's angry frustration into this particular subject. It really is one of those things that's like, yeah, we really don't have a good idea of what an RPG really is anymore. And something like a Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is really the closest we got to like an RPG this year. And it's not really even close to what you would think of as like, Clair Obscur or Monster Hunter. And I'm like, like obviously Clair Obscur is an RPG. It's an obvious RPG. It's basically the closest thing we have to like a JRPG that came out this year. But technically I understand, like, yeah, we've really loosened that definition to a point where it doesn't really mean what it used to anymore. It's really no longer about role-playing games. But the thing is I think that if you are really going to stick to that definition, you are going to have so few role-playing games. That genre is going to be so barren. It's so difficult to make a legitimate RPG where you're making actual choices that affect things or doing things that affect things in the world, making choices in a way or shape or form that you're either going to consider every video game to be an RPG, unless you're like a strict narrative game, something like a Dispatch or something like that, or, like you're going to have nothing be an RPG because, the only thing that would qualify is freaking Baldur's Gate 3 and Divinity, and it's like, okay, we'll get one RPG game a year. Okay? Like it's not, it doesn't work, So I think there's no way to make anybody happy here. I generally agree with Angry Gohan, but I just think we as a gaming community have strayed so far from it. I think if you went back and you tried to like grab that term again and be like, no, we are reappropriating the term to be what it really means, I think it would cause so much confusion in the gaming space because we have used it like that for so long. And I think you would have so few actual RPGs that it'd be like, why are we even using this term anymore? Because it really doesn't belong to like 99% of games. So I understand his frustration. I think it's a wonderful topic of conversation. I don't see this topic brought up very much, and I think it's really cool that he brought that up. I don't think many people would die on that hill, because I think it's a very small hill to die on, to be quite frank. But clearly, because he's such a FemShep fan, he clearly actually appreciates like legit role playing games, and I get that, bro. I get it. I do think the hatred towards Clair Obscur is a little like misguided. If you're gonna hate something, hate like a thing that's actually not an RPG being considered an RPG. Maybe Monster Hunter Wilds is honestly a better thing to hate on. Like, it probably has less traditional RPG elements than Clair Obscur does. So, bro, I get it. But I actually really appreciated that comment, even though it was not like exactly what I was going for in the video. I thought it was and it was a little bit pointed, little angry, but he is angry Gohan. I do appreciate it. I do think it's a fascinating topic of conversation. And I hope to hear more of you in the future, sir. Very interesting. Very interesting. So that was our comment corner. We are over 20 minutes into the episode. We haven't even talked. Well, we've talked about video games, but we haven't even gotten into the news. Come on. This is going to be an episode for the books, for real. Dang. All right. So let's get right into it then. Our first news story comes on the back of Nintendo, which this was something a lot of people were talking about. I'm going to delve into it a little bit and give my thoughts. So Nintendo Switch 2 sales slowed over Christmas. It's down 35% compared to Switch 1 year 1 holiday sales. So basically, if you took the first year of sales from Switch 1 during Christmas, and you took the first year of sales for Switch 2 during Christmas, Switch 1 sold a lot more. Over 1 in 3, 35% more. So, what the frick happened here? All right? Like, wasn't Switch 2 the hottest console ever? In fact, it's literally, categorically, and statistically, the hottest console launch of all time. It has sold more units at its launch than any other console. You'd almost think that this headline would be insisting, or implying at least, that the Switch 2 sucks and nobody wants the Switch 2, and why would anybody buy one of those stupid Switch 2s? They are dumb. Well, obviously not. They've bought literal millions of them, and they made them the best console launch of all time. So that doesn't add up, right? So Nintendo comes out and they're like, hey, we actually think that there is a reason behind this. It's economic uncertainty. People are a little bit tighter with their wallets right now. They don't know if like a $500, $450 purchase is worth it. And we really didn't have a big Western title for the holiday season to really drive console sales. So if you remember, and this is pretty freaking true, and gosh darn, yeah, I mean, you can't imagine a better launch for the Switch 1. The Switch 1, by holiday season, the first holiday season it was out, had both Breath of the Wild and Super Mario Odyssey available for purchase. So you had the two heaviest hitters for Nintendo, both back to back, right there for you to be like, should I buy a Switch 1 or not? It's like, well, do you like Mario and Zelda, literally the two biggest gaming franchises possibly of all time, and two of the most beloved and, like widely accepted amongst all demographics, like IPs of all time? Yeah, then maybe you should buy a Switch 1. Here we have Mario Kart, we have Donkey Kong, which are both considered very good critically and commercially, but I think obviously Donkey Kong has a lot less commercial, like he has a lot less cachet. As an IP, I think he's a little bit more niche. He's not as well known as a Mario or a Zelda, and I think Mario Kart World kind of disappointed in a lot of ways. I don't think that game's going to it's going to deter people from buying, but I don't think it's a massive system seller. I think that's just something that once you have a Switch, you buy Mario Kart. Like you just do at some point. And then the big release this holiday season was technically Metroid Prime 4 for the Switch 2. One, it's a cross-platform, so technically you could buy that on Switch 1. And two, really three is Metroid has always been a very niche franchise. It's always been one of those series that has never sold very well. It's always sold very more so in the West, but worldwide, that nobody gives a frick about Metroid. It really is one of those series that you hear hardcore gamers talk about all the time, but nobody really cares about. There's a reason that Nintendo hasn't made one of these games in literal like decades. Or not decades. Technically, there was that Metroid Other M or whatever the frick, that 2D side scroller that came out a while back. The name escapes me. I'm pretty sure Other M is the freaking action game made by Platinum or something. I can't freaking remember. But anyway, Metroid's not going to be one of those big sellers. And three, that game didn't review well. That game was really considered to be very disappointing by all accounts, or the vast majority of accounts. It was considered to just be fine. So it's not going to be a massive system seller in any regard. So all that to say, Nintendo thinks that there's a few reasons, specifically this holiday season, it did not pick up. I think there's a totally different reason. I think it makes sense based on kind of what I was alluding to earlier. This is likely because people who wanted a Switch 2, like I think the most people who got them a long time ago, right? Like this is probably the most stocked console demand I've ever seen in the history of any console launch I've ever seen. It is kind of impressive how Nintendo was able to meet demand. And you're like, well, why is that? And it's because if you don't remember, when the Switch 2 originally came out, which was in the summer, it was one of those times where Trump was like, hey, we're going to tariff the frick out of China and all these other places. And those places just happened to be the places that Nintendo was manufacturing their Switch 2s. I think it was Vietnam and China were the two main places, and they were both being hit by massive tariffs by the Trump administration. So the idea was Nintendo was going to flood the market with stock to avoid tariffs. So that's what they did. It was really easy to get a Switch 2. Still is really easy to get a Switch 2. They met demand up front. What normally happens with these console launches is it's impossible to get one of these things. It's either really hard or like what a traditional or like from a business sense you want the demand to be is you want to hit like 90% of demand. You want like 10% of consumers to be like, dang, I have to try to get this thing, but like it really does make it feel like it's one of those hot commodities, like it's a FOMO almost, in a way. And you don't want like 50% of demand to not be met, because then like people are just pissed off and they're like, why are you not stocking this thing? Like that doesn't make sense. So you want most people to get it, but you also want them to kind of struggle a little bit to find one. And in this case, it was like there was no struggle. It was if you didn't get it at release, you were going to get it a few weeks later, and that was going to be a non-issue, non-starter. It wasn't a big deal. So if everybody has one already, not as many people are going to want to buy them. Like the demand has been met. So it makes sense that Switch 1 was not as sought after initially. And so stock was a little bit harder to come by. Nintendo maybe hadn't made as many units. Now, Switch 1, one of the biggest consoles of all time, it makes sense. Nintendo's prepped and ready. And the tariffs, they made them flood the market. It wasn't this like FOMO marketing where they kind of met demand, but they kind of didn't. They got it all out there. So I look at this headline and I say, yeah, that is a big drop off, and it's less than I would have expected. Or it's a bigger drop off than I would have expected. But that's kind of understood. Like I kind of am okay with that. I don't look at this and say, oh my gosh, nobody likes the Switch 2. Everybody hates it. Obviously freaking not. It is the biggest console launch of all time. Like to say nobody wants the Switch 2, nobody likes it, is dumb. It's stupid. It is a non-issue. But of course, this is a headline that you probably have to drill down a little bit deeper into. And yeah, like economic uncertainty and the fact that there wasn't a big launch title for the holiday season to really boost people to go and spend and buy for this console. Yeah, sure, Nintendo's right, but I think it's the console's selling fine. Like, it's not like this is like, oh, the first nail in the coffin for Switch 2. Its sales have crumbled. Like, no, I don't. I think that's a little hyperbolic. So that is that delved into. If you heard, have you heard? If you haven't, now you have. Next, we have, of course, Ubisoft coming back up in the news again. This is always fun to talk about Ubisoft because I can't remember the last good thing I said about them. Ubisoft closes Halifax studios. This is not something I would normally talk about, mainly because this is a no-name studio, and you'd be surprised how many no-name studios Ubisoft has. Like, if you even go through Ubisoft's catalog of games, I remember when they were being sold off. They split into two different companies, and the one that's like got Tencent and the one that's like got everything else. And I was like, okay, well, the new company has Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, Tom Clancy, yada yada yada. They have the big ones. What the frick is staying at the traditional Ubisoft, the vanilla Ubisoft? What's over there? If you go through and look at the studios and the IP that is retaining, it's some weird stuff. It's like some like there's like a weird like browser-based horse game that like that was one that stood out to me. Is like, oh well, it's you raise your own pony, and it's browser exclusive. It's not like a game you can play on a console or anything like that. You can only play it on a web browser. There's a million other studios like that at Ubisoft, but like these games are making millions of dollars. Like, don't get me wrong. But like I've never heard of them. And so like Halifax was one of those studios I was like, I feel like I've heard of Halifax. That sounds somewhat familiar. Well, Assassin's Creed Rebellion is their big game. It's a mobile chibi style strategy game that obviously is based around the Assassin's Creed series. So essentially, it's Funko Pop strategy with Assassin's Creed, if you weren't familiar with chibi style. But these guys before that were best known for co-developing Rocksmith. If you go through their actual but catalog of games, most of the time they've been a support studio. Most of the time they've made frickin' like Wheel of Fortune the game or Trivial Pursuit the game, like garbage, like stuff that nobody would be like, oh yeah, that's a game I want to play in the hardcore sphere. Like, it's stuff that you would give a 5-year-old or like a 60-year-old in a retirement home, and they will be happy with it. It will be, a property that they're familiar with and a game that's simple enough for everybody to get understand and get behind. Rocksmith is probably the most interesting or hardcore game they've ever been a part of, and they did not develop the game. They helped develop the game. So this is a very... For some reason, I feel like I've heard of the studio, but when you look through their catalog, there is no reason to note Halifax as like this big studio that Ubisoft should be proud of, or we should, as a gaming community, should be mourning the loss of. Like, it's really not. They shut it down. 71 roles will be impacted. What really makes this an interesting story is this comes just weeks, 1 month after 60 of the 71 employees signed up to unionize. So I kind of buried the lead on that one, but yeah. So this looks really freaking bad. Immediately, Ubisoft says, immediately after these guys unionize, they say, hey, shut the frick up. No, you ain't. You are our studio, and if you're going to unionize, we're getting rid of you. That looks really freaking bad. Like, really, really, really bad. So Ubisoft cuts them after they unionize and say, look, we're cutting everywhere, okay? It's nothing personal, has nothing to do with this whole unionization thing. Trust us. We just didn't want you guys anymore. And it's like, okay, that's a little hard to believe given the timing of everything and given the fact that Ubisoft is kind of earning a very very in-depth reputation as like a really scummy development or like really scummy publisher. Um, you know, I think it's hard for me to really wash my hands of the entire sexual harassment scandal that really plagued Ubisoft a year or two ago, where they basically half of their upper management was like, "Oh yeah, we've just been sexually harassing everybody, and it's all very well documented, and everybody knows it." And it's like, yeah, the Gelmonts never did anything about it. We just kind of like rolled with it for a while, and then eventually it came to light and people started suing the company, and we were like, "Oh, well, sure. Well, we'll just shuffle those guys back into the company at different roles, but we're not going to fire them." It's like, "Ooh, this is none of this really looks good." And then they get into bed with Tencent, and none of it looks good. None of it looks good on paper. It all looks pretty scummy. It all looks like the leadership at Ubisoft really does not know how to run a company very well. And I would say you don't shutter a company like a month after they unionize. Give them at least another 2 months for the PR hit you're going to take. Be like, yeah, they unionized 3 months ago. It's like, oh, well, maybe that's long enough for them to make a decision. Maybe that's long enough for them to really actually, if they were going to do it, they would have done it, what, like a couple of weeks? Oh, they did do that. They did do it a couple of weeks after. That doesn't look good then. So they've already moved to like kind of fight this. This is a Canadian studio. So they are already in the process of going through litigation and trying to support the union members who were laid off, which is probably literally all of them. And, good luck. And the reason I say good luck is it's because how are you going to frickin' prove that it's that? Because, like I was saying, this studio has not really a fantastic track record. It does not have any big major IP. It does not have any massive sellers. To my understanding, this was not a massive revenue driving studio. And to be even more frank, Assassin's Creed Rebellion launched in 2018, so 8 years ago, and it has steadily declined in revenue. This is an open fact. Looking at VGC, they reported on this. Assassin's Creed Rebellion has steadily declined in revenue and ended live operations and stopped producing content for the game fairly recently. So what does that tell me? It means this studio ain't doing nothing. The thing that they were doing isn't making money no mo, and they don't have a track record of producing things that are like critically and commercially super well received. Sounds like you may want to chop some heads off at that studio. Sounds like that studio doesn't need to be around anymore. That's kind of what I would say. So unless you can subpoena a lot of people at Ubisoft and get their emails, and they have an email that says, "Hey, we're going to freaking shutter these guys because I freaking hate unions. Those things suck." Like if you find that email, you're good. I think you've got a case. If not, I think what's going to happen is you get Ubisoft in court on a good day. You get them sitting down on the stand, and they say, "Why did you do it, Mr. Ubisoft man?" And they say, "Well, because the studio kind of sucked. And it wasn't making us money anymore, and we have way too many people and way too many studios, and we had to cut costs because our big revenue-driving IP have now been moved over to another company that's now owned by Tencent. So we cut that studio because that game they made hadn't made a lot of money, and they hadn't made a good game in a while." And it's like, okay. Sounds like a pretty good reason. So honestly, sounds like a pretty good reason. Do I look at Ubisoft right now and I say, "Oh no, dude, like I want to give them the benefit of the absolutely freaking not." Like I look at Ubisoft and I'm like, "Bro, I would not be surprised if these guys unionized and they immediately were like, we got to get rid of them. Yeah, that union's a problem. Get rid of that union." Like I genuinely can see Ubisoft doing that. They've made way too many weird, stupid decisions that are bad PR and maybe benefit the company but do not benefit anybody else. Like that's Ubisoft, bro. Ubisoft is just not very well run, not very well done. And yeah, I kind of think that they probably did axe them because they unionized. It doesn't look good. Regardless of if they did or didn't, it doesn't look good. So another doesn't look good story for Ubisoft. Okay. Sounds like a chalk up another win. Another great year in store for Ubisoft, friends. Let's see how it continues over there at Ubi. Moving on. Next, we have an AI story. Oh, my favorite. Well, we had a big AI episode not long ago, where I got into kind of my thoughts on AI, at least how I see him now. I'm still very murky on a lot of different AI and how it works, and the pluses, the minuses, and what you can use it for, what you can't use it for, what's acceptable, what's not. I'm still very murky. It's all very gray. I think the internet has clearly taken a stance of AI, it's bad. Nobody likes that thing. If it has anything to do with AI, it doesn't matter the context, black, white, gray, it's bad. AI has gotten a lot of negative press. I kind of understand it. I think that there's there's good things that can come from AI. There's also bad things that can come from AI, certainly. But I think nobody looks at it with nuance, or at least it's very regular that people don't. I have been certainly on the receiving end of that in the past. As I said earlier in this episode, if you didn't skip it from the timestamps, if you're listening all the way through, much appreciated, friend. But Larian it was one of the big headlines I read not long ago. In that episode was the CEO of Larian, Sam Vinke. So I'm going to pronounce it. He said, "Hey, we do use AI. We use it for PowerPoints, we use it for ideation, and we use it for concept art." He said a couple of other things, but I'm kind of paraphrasing. So the real thing that really stood out to people was like, "Yo, concept art? What the frick? Art? You're using AI art? That's the worst thing that you can do. That is a cardinal sin." And so a lot of backlash. This went on to eventually the company having an AMA on Reddit, and they were like, "Hey, we need to clear the air. There's been a lot of bad press surrounding this AI fiasco. We want to make sure you guys understand exactly what we're talking about because it's not as bad as you think. We promise, we promise, we promise." So he came out. He had a press statement first, and then a lot of these statements I'm going to get into. There's a lot of quotes here, and I'm going to go through them all. And a lot of them are from the AMA or the Reddit thread. So originally he says, look, there's a problem. He comes out and he has a press statement and he says, "Hey, we only use it for ideation." Okay. So that's all. We don't actually use the art itself. We just use it for like inspiration for art. So we'll get into the AMA now, is basically the paraphrase for the entire article. I'm not going to read you all the quotes from there because that's basically all he says. It's very PRE. So he gets a lot more off cuff with the AMA, starting with people continuing to be like, "What the frick? You're still using it for AI art. You suck balls. I hate you." He says, "Holy F, guys." That was the starting statement of this article. VGC, by the way, the reporter I'm using here. VGC, "Holy F, guys. We're not pushing hard for replacing our concept artists with AI. We have a team of 72 artists, of which 23 are concept artists, and we are hiring more. The art they create is original. I am very proud of what they do. I was asked explicitly about concept art and our use of generative AI. I answered that we use it to explore things. I didn't say that we use it to develop concept art. The artists do that, and they are indeed world-class artists." Okay, so I guess I should get into the obvious question. Is using concept art for ideation, or is using AI for ideation a problem? Personally, I would say no. Absolutely not. If you're using generative AI to you say, "Generate me an image of a griffin," and then it generates a griffin, or you say, generate me an image of a griffin with a top hat who's eating dinner with Bugs Bunny, and then I don't know, whatever. You can do that with generative AI, though. Isn't that wonderful? I know it's evil, but sounds kind of cool to me. But anyway, do I just sound like a really big AI defender here? Like I'm just the biggest. I love AI. That's my favorite thing in the world. I don't have a good track record with it, but I promise I'm very in the middle. I'm on the fence. I lean towards good at the moment, but I think it could easily be very, very bad in the future. Very complicated opinions I have on AI, okay? Promise. We're not here to talk about them, though. Well, we are, in a way. Just not the deep, deep level process there. Anyway, is generative AI a problem when you use it? If you generate the Bugs Bunny with a griffin, Baldur's Gate wanted to see how that would look. I don't know why. And they're like, dang, yeah, that actually does look like a cool griffin. And then they draw that griffin with a top hat eating Bugs Bunny for dinner, which is not what the original prompt was, but maybe that's what inspired it. Who knows? That's where the inspiration took them. If that's where that goes, I don't see a problem with that. What's wrong with that? That's like reading a book and being like, oh yeah, well, it kind of triggered something in my head, and that idea that I read from that author was like, oh yeah, cool. That's actually a lot more in line with what, like, it changed my mind on how a griffin looks, or it gave me an idea for a different kind of looking griffin, or whatever the frick. Like, what's the difference? I don't think there is one. It's just inspiration. And I think the big argument here is you're taking art from other people. These models are being not chosen, but they're being fed in data, data sets from other artists that didn't consent to it, or maybe, it's imitating the art so closely that it's basically plagiarism. There's a lot of arguments you can make here, but I think that if you're not just copying and pasting that art, there's really no problem. Like, I don't see an issue with that. So not only does he, comment on that, he then goes on to say, hey, not only do we not ever use it for anything outside of ideation, we're never going to use it again. Like he said, look, we've completely taken out AI from the work line. We're not allowing our concept artists to use AI to help with conception and ideation anymore, because I don't want this to be a part of the conversation. I don't want this to be a problem. So you win. They will no longer use AI in development with concept art. It will not be a part of the workflow. It will not be a tool that they will have access to, which I think is honestly kind of effed up. If they're using it the way that they said they're using it, which is just for ideation and exploration of concepts, I think that's kind of effed up that you're restricting your artists from using it. But he's like, look, this is clearly something that a bunch of consumers think that is a problem. We're getting a lot of negative backlash for this. F you, if you really think it's that big of a deal, we will stop using it. We will no longer be having it within our games or within our workflow, which is, I think, hey, ballsy to go down with the ship like that, or not go down with the ship, but like ballsy to be like, yo, if that's what you want so bad, you can have it. Fine. I think it is still going to negatively impact their artists if that is genuinely how they were ideating and getting these concepts off the ground. That sucks. It's one less tool. And I do think AI can be used as a tool, not as a creation metric itself, but as a tool to help with creation. I think it can be used that way. But he says, look, we're never going to use it again for that stuff. F that. He didn't say never, but he said we're going to scrap any further use of it. Having said that, however, he goes on to say, quote, having said that, we continuously try to improve the speed with which we try to make things. The more iterations we can do, the better in general the gameplay is. We think generative AI can help us with this, and so we're trying things out across departments. Our hope is that we can aid us in defining and redefining ideas faster, leading to more focused development cycle, less waste, and ultimately a higher quality game. The important bit to note is that we will not generate creative assets that end up in the game without being 100% sure of the origins of the training data and the consent of those who created the data. If we use Gen AI model to create in-game assets, then it'll be trained on data we own. So he says, hey, we're still using AI, brother, we still using AI. Yeah. In the VGC article that I'm reading here, or I'm quoting from, it also says that Steam has now incorporated that policy and that the influx of AI games on Steam has increased 8,000% over the past year. One of the things we talked about on the episode where I was talking about AI was also the Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 developer coming out and basically saying, yeah, I use AI, and most developers I know use AI. It's an incredibly beneficial tool for game development. It helps us get our games out faster. It helps us get ideas in the game faster and makes the game better. Just generally speaking, if you think that you don't know somebody who's using AI, they're using AI. I think if you're a developer, especially like a technical, you're coding things. I think if you're a developer and you're not using AI, I'm not going to say you're stupid, okay? I'm not going to say that. I think you're smart, okay? But I think you are highly inefficient. I think it is obvious you are highly inefficient because I've written code, bro. I've written code. I've made applications, several of them, from ground up. And to say that if I had an AI that could just generate me a web app, a bare bones web app, or generate me a web page, or, and then maybe I could even for like a web page, which I find HTML a lot easier. I know some people struggle with it. Weirdly. Like I always struggled with like C# and stuff, more low level languages, but like I was always very good at HTML somehow. And I knew a lot of people who were really good at C#, but like were not good with HTML. But anyway, if I could just be like, yeah, generate me a header in HTML. I want it to be right here, and I want it to have blue text and blah 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 blah, and boom, it makes that for you. That saves you so much time. It saves you so much time, and maybe you'll have to tweak it. Like, let's be real, you're gonna have to tweak it. You shouldn't just blindly allow a thing to code something for you without fully understanding it too. Because if something goes wrong, you need to be able to find it, because AI is not infallible. AI is going to make mistakes. And when it does, you need to be able to figure out where those mistakes are and how to fix them. But if you are going to do that, if you're willing to know how that works, if you're already at that level, at that skill where you know how these things work, so you can go in and debug and you can find an error and you can figure out how to fix it, I think you are far, far more productive using AI. Far, far, far more productive. So to see Larian be like, look, we're still going to freaking use AI because it is an invaluable tool to make our games, which are giant games, faster and better. I think he's absolutely right. I think he's 100% right. And if he's like, yo, and just FYI, we are going to double check the data that we're using when we use models, and we're in the future, hopefully, only going to be using a model that is based off the data that we own. Bro, what the frick is the problem with this? Can you find me an issue with this outside of energy consumption? Which, by the way, you driving a car to work is energy consumption. You used a microwave is energy consumption. You turning on a light bulb is energy consumption. All that bullcrap is energy consumption. Is AI potentially more so energy consumption than other things? Absolutely. 100%. But everything in this world is using energy, brother. So I think it's a trade-off, absolutely. And I think we need to be mindful of the energy consumption. But I think that, like people aren't mindful of energy consumption in a million other ways because they have to get their job done, or they have to do this, or they have to do that. I think this AI is another tool. I think it's going to be used in a similar fashion. And I think that obviously It's fine to do this. It's fine to do this. There's very few holes you can poke in this argument. Very, very few. I think the energy consumption is the only one. And I don't think people are still going to be on board with it. I think they're going to look at this and they're going to say, AI, big red flag, Henry no likey, or audience no likey, and they're going to turn away and not be cool with this. Which I think is, again, I think that's foolish. I think that is foolish. I think if you generally are like, yo, I won't touch anything with AI, brother, you are not going to be touching much over the next few years. I think most games you're playing already probably use some form of AI. Probably. Most games in the future that you're going to be playing probably used some form of AI. Somehow, some way, they used it. You don't hear about it because why the heck would you come out and say that when everybody who's coming out and saying that is getting absolutely massacred? They are being dragged through the mud. People are like, I don't want anything to do with this studio. The studio sucks, yada, yada, yada. Not buying your game. Why would you come out and do that? You're not gonna. So a lot of studios are going to be using these tools. They're going to continue using these tools. They're going to get better. And eventually you're going to have, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2's developer making a game in like a year and a half, and it's going to be the same size as Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, and it's going to be insane. And I think, this is Larian honestly approaching this in probably the most sane way I've ever heard anybody approaching AI usage. And I don't know how you would fight this any further. Like, I think it would be odd to fight this any further. But I will see people do it. And I haven't looked into people's comments on this, but come on. That's the update from Larian on that. I really do think the conversation on AI is very entertaining. It's very entertaining. I wish I was more knowledgeable. I feel like I'm more knowledgeable than most on it. I feel like I'm still not knowledgeable enough on AI. It's so complicated. The conversation around it is so divisive and so driven by so many different things and aspects and information that it's hard for me to fully wrap my head around all of it and comment on it completely in any way. And I think anybody probably doing that right now is doing that. Anybody talking about AI is probably not talking about it in a fully educated way or in a fully non-biased way. And I like to think I'm looking at it non-biased, but like I think it's totally possible. Frickin' Sarah O'Connor is out there shaking her head right now, watching us give the keys of the TI to frickin' giving to the world over the TI 86. What the frick is the name of the Terminator? I don't frickin' know. I've never seen Terminator. Is that a problem? I don't know. I've never seen Rocky either. I've also never seen. What's another big movie I've never seen? A lot. The Godfather? I've never seen The Godfather. I don't know. Is that like one people crucify you for? I don't know. But anyway, I don't know. I think there's no such thing as a good conversation of AI right now. You're either going to have somebody defending it for reasons that they probably shouldn't be, like corporate billionaires who just want to justify the billions they're putting into it, or you're going to see people who are like, well, I don't like generative AI because I don't know. It's stealing art from people, and it's like, I don't know. That's very narrow. That's very narrow-minded, and I don't know if that's a full way of how to view AI. But okay. Anyway, I guarantee you, we will be talking more about AI in the future. So feel free to listen to me rehash my opinions for months to come. Next up, massive layoffs at Meta, the closure of Twisted Pixel, and Sanzaru. This is a really big. This is in my personal opinion, easily the biggest story, because I think this signals. It obviously signals Meta's pivot away from the metaverse, which is insane because they changed their freaking name to the Meta company because they believed so much in Meta. Like, oh my gosh, what the frick? You just don't do that, man. You just don't. I still think Meta technically works as like an incorporating, like, we are just a big tech company. It's like, okay, cool. I guess that still technically kind of works. But like, you obviously and openly said we are changing the name of our company to the Meta because we're 110% down on the metaverse. And it made a lot of other big companies delve into the metaverse and invest in the metaverse. I remember the investment in digital real estate skyrocketed when Facebook did that. Or Meta, I guess now, did that. Facebook at the time, actually. But it skyrocketed. There are a bunch of tycoons out there freaking buying up digital real estate. It's like, oh my gosh, I would not want to be on one of those freaking the ranches of the metaverse with a lot of land for the metaverse. But anyway, um, it's sad. It's sad, and we'll go ahead and get into it. Let's get into the details. So Meta cuts 10% of its Reality Labs division, which is obviously the metaverse and Oculus department of their company. So 10% doesn't sound like a horrific amount. It's not like they've completely given up on it. It's like, oh yeah, freaking 90% of that particular, division of the company is still there. But they've closed two of their biggest VR game development studios, specifically Twisted Pixel, which you may recognize as the Splosion Man developers, which I'll go ahead and say pretty much all of the developers they had on that they bought up were never big deals. Like, they were never massive deals. So it would have been cool if they'd bought up like Insomniac. Obviously not now, but like Insomniac has actual history with VR development. But they didn't buy up an actual good studio to work on VR. They bought up Twisted Pixel and Sanzaru. Twisted Pixel, like I said, Splosion Man and Deadpool VR is their most recent and biggest VR title that Meta produced from them. And then Sanzaru, which I have a very detailed and colorful past with. Sanzaru, obviously the developers behind Sly Cooper 4. Do not get me started on that. I'm a big Sly Cooper fan, and they were the developer that was given, honestly, went back. I used to hate Sly Cooper 4 because it does a lot to really mess with the canon of Sly Cooper. Like some really, like, it's really weird that they did some of the stuff in that game because it really is like an insult to most Sly Cooper fans. They basically turn a character that was good evil, and it doesn't make any sense why they needed to do that, and it kind of f's up like an entire arc for my favorite character, Bentley. Bentley from Sly Cooper. It kind of just f's him. It's like, yeah, well, I guess f you, Bentley. And it's like, Bentley's my favorite character, so they just did him dirty. In a lot of ways, they did a lot of characters dirty in that series or in that specific game. But I went back and played it a few years ago, and I actually think that game is pretty solid. Considering that developer didn't really have a lot of this experience. Animation in that game is great. I wouldn't say it pushes Sly Cooper forward in any way, but it's a well-made game. It's actually pretty well made. The game bombed. Nobody played it. There's even a massive like cliffhanger ending, and it was meant to be a DLC/sequel, and the game sold so poorly that Sony was like, yeah, no need to do that. And so it's just left Sly Cooper fans on like this massive cliffhanger of like, well, we'll never see the end of that. And it's very unfortunate. But they made Sly Cooper 4, and you may know them better as the Asgard's 1 and 2 developers. Asgard's Wrath 1 and 2 developers. Asgard's Wrath 2, known as obviously one of the highest rated VR titles of all time. So this is a very accomplished, at this point, critically VR studio. Like, Sanzaru absolutely put a marker on themselves as we are one of the best VR developers because of Asgard's Wrath 2. Haven't played it, but I've only heard good things. So they also, a little less press on this, Armature was also closed. You may say, Armature, I may have heard of them before. Went back and looked at their iconography, their list of games that they've made. And Recore, a Microsoft exclusive Metroidvania is like kind of their big deal. Like that's their real big original IP. Most of what they've done is they were a porting house. So that's why nobody's really throwing them out there. Twisted Pixel, the Splosion Man series was a very well regarded and very well known indie arcade game from the Xbox 360 era. Sanzaru, obviously, the Sly Cooper devs and Sly Cooper 4 devs specifically. Sucker Punch is the original developers of the Sly trilogy, but Sanzaru, obviously known for Sly 4 and Asgard's Wrath. So they're all done. They're all dead. That still leaves a few studios left under their house. Obviously, Batman, the Batman Arkham studio, Batman Arkham VR was a great game. I played that and it was really good, but that sequel was actually in development by, I believe, it was under development by Sanzaru. Sanzaru was developing the sequel to Batman Arkham VR, which was a great game, and I'm sure that the sequel would have been really good too. But you'll never get it because Meta's moving away from it. But they say, Meta specifically says that they're pivoting into wearables. So if you don't know, if you haven't heard, they have the Meta glasses now. So they're these AI virtual reality, not virtual reality, augmented reality headwear that you can put on. And, I don't actually know that much about them, to be quite honest, but I know that they're incredibly successful to a point where Meta has stopped production, or they're not stopped production. They're still producing. They're producing like crazy now, but they didn't expect them to be that big of a deal. And so now they've blown up in the States. They've put every order on a wait list until the end of 2026, and they stopped taking orders outside of the US. They completely stopped because it was like, we can't meet demand. Like, these things are too big of a deal. We have to keep making these things. And of course, they're also saying AI. AI is also a big reason we're not moving forward. We need to save money for AI, was essentially what they said. We have to make sure we have the money to invest in AI appropriately, so we're cutting these studios that cost us a lot of money to then invest that into AI. So, what am I hearing? I'm hearing VR, it's a dead man. That sounds hyperbolic, right? But VR, I mean, like, Meta was really the only people really pushing VR, right? Not only were they really pushing VR, but they kind of cemented themselves as the only people who could really do it. Like, Oculus was originally the only major studio that could, or like hardware producer that was really producing anything that a general consumer could get and use, right? And then they bought Oculus because they were like, oh, well, we think like Meta, the metaverse, we're going to use this to incorporate the metaverse. VR is going to be a big deal. So now that Meta is saying, well, we really don't want to do that anymore, we are now basically down the biggest VR headset producer in the world. If they are no longer wanting to do that, then that knocks it off. So, what does that mean? It means you're looking at Valve, the Vive, which are these incredibly niche devices that require a lot of space. They require, like a lot of money. And then they require you to also buy into software. Like, are there enough good games on these platforms for you to really play? And I would say over the course of a decade, we've maybe gotten 5. I can think of Beat Saber, Boneworks, Half-Life Alyx, Batman Arkham VR, and maybe Asgard's Wrath 2. Those are the 5 that like come to my mind as like people really actually enjoyed those games. And I would say that a lot of those games aren't even, they're very niche. I would say I'd be surprised if somebody bought, I bought a VR because of Batman Arkham, but like most people I would say probably wouldn't want to do that. It was also very cheap at the time for me to get a VR headset. I've always said like Beat Saber is like, I would buy a headset just for Beat Saber. Like, that's genuinely one of my favorite games ever. And it's super fun and easy to play and is you don't have to invest a lot in a space or anything really for Beat Saber to use Beat Saber. It's it's more of just a fun, like almost exercise equipment in a way, right? But there's not that much incentive right now to really play VR. There's too many barriers. You look at it, let's legit look at VR for a second. And as somebody who believes, I am a VR believer, I've always said this, I'm always going to say it. I'm a VR believer. The technology requires you to have money, space, energy. You have to get up and be active. There is a physical component of there's a lot of motion sickness that still comes with VR. I cannot play for Batman VR. I could not play Batman VR for more than 3 hours. It was a problem. Batman VR was a great game, a really good experience, and I really enjoyed it. But even then, I could not play that game for more than 3 hours without kind of feeling woozy, without kind of wanting to take a break, without like kind of sweating a little bit, throwing punches and stuff like that. Like it's an investment of your time and energy, really. And there are definitely days where I get back from work or I go to the gym or whatever. I work out in the yard and I'm like, F that, dude. I'm not freaking putting on a VR headset. I'm kind of exhausted. So there's a lot of barriers to entry to this. The technology is still not there. Do you want a high graphic fidelity game? Most gamers would say yes. I don't care, but most gamers would typically say yes. VR isn't going to give you that. The hardware isn't capable of producing super realistic 3D graphics. The big VR push was like, well, you're going to be able to sit in this seat at a NBA game or something like that, and you'll be able to buy a ticket and you'll be able to look around and feel like you're there, or you'll be able to go to the doctor and they'll be able to look at you through VR. And I have still not figured out how that's going to work. The doctor thing, people kept pushing that as like a potential use case. I'm like, I don't know how they're going to do that. I feel like you kind of have to be physically there in order for a doctor to examine you at all, but whatever. And then of course, NBA, I still think if you genuinely want to watch like a football game or a basketball game or anything, I still think genuinely the best experience you're going to have is watching it at home. You're going to have commentary from professional commentators. You're going to have the best camera angles available. You're going to be able to see everything happen. You're going to be able to like not have to drive there, not have to pay for parking, not have to be, put out for exorbitant snacks and all sorts of other bullcrap, not have to deal with, crowds and all that other nonsense. I understand that a lot of people still want to go out and do that, but I think that your experience is infinitely better. And you don't have to pay for a seat. You get to watch it for free on your TV. Unless you're paying as like a pay-per-view game or whatever the frick. You can typically watch it for free somehow. Most big games. So why? Why would you want to play VR? And I think when technology gets so good that those barriers are gone. Okay, well, it's no longer going to produce motion sickness. It's no longer going to have this big clunky headset on your head. It's no longer going to, I don't know. I still think that the active element of it is going to scare people away in a lot of cases. But like, I think that there's a lot of things that technology improving can get to. And I think we will eventually get to that place. I think what I've always seen as the end all be all is like we're gonna have a Sword Art Online of video games, and that's what I always kind of saw. This was VR was the current form of VR was always the first step to that. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, I'm a freaking weeaboo. So I'm talking about Sword Art Online, which is an anime, which is like the first season is like the only good part of it, and it's basically a guy gets sucked into a VR world that's basically just a traditional video game. But if you die in the game, you die in real life. That's essentially the whole hook of the show. But it does do a very good job of kind of going through this power fantasy of like, what if you were super good in real life, or it almost felt like you were really good in real life because you were really good at video games? What if you were actually cool and you actually felt like you were having a real life impact on something because you were good at video games. I feel like a lot of anime tries to kind of tap into that power fantasy of like, are you a loser who plays too many video games? Well, you're actually really cool in this universe. It's like that's kind of where look, I have a video game podcast and I'm a weeb. I freaking totally relate to that power fantasy and would love to have it happen. All right. But it is definitely a power fantasy for losers. Okay. So, like, I 100% want it and relate to it, but it is definitely a power fantasy for losers, objectively. So, we need to get to a point where you are basically plugging your brain into a virtual world that looks and feels like a actual video game or like an actual real world experience. And that is obviously way far down the line. Way far down the line. I think right now AR is probably the focus, and it makes sense. It's a way less technical, way more functional in a real world environment kind of deal. AR is, of course, augmented reality. You would probably know it from like a Pokemon Go is a part of augmented reality. But what I'm thinking of is more so what Meta is investing in, which is wearables, which is like you put on glasses and like it'll probably have like, I don't know, your text messages come up in the side of the lens or something like that. And it looks kind of like a freaking cyberpunk world through your eyes. I think that's kind of where we're moving. That's where we're moving with technology right now. I think we jumped the gun with VR. Love it to death. I still remember the first time I tried VR. It was PlayStation VR 1. I have to say 1 because there's a 2. And I remember trying the demo disc. They gave you like a PlayStation, almost like a demo disc, and it came with like, I think it was just called like a VR Worlds or something like that. But it was basically a bunch of tech demos that they had made in-house at Sony. And one of them was a Shark Tank one, where like you're a scuba diver going down in a tank, like a shark cage, like that's supposed to protect you from sharks, and like a shark essentially attacks you while you're in this cage. And I remember the shark attack wasn't even the most interesting thing. It was like I put on that headset and I was there. I was like, "Oh my gosh, like I'm in another world. I'm in another world right now. Oh my gosh." And that feeling was unbelievable. It was amazing. It was like it's finally happened. This thing that I've seen in movies and sci-fi, we are living it. VR exists. I feel like I have entered another realm. And I think VR can still do that. I think it's trying to be more of a video game now than an immersive experience, and that's fine, but I think we need the technology to go leaps and bounds above where it is now before we really get to a point that it's like, okay, yeah, this is going to be a mainstay, a staple within gaming, a staple within technology. Meta was really trying to push something that honestly you just don't really need. We have other alternatives that are still better within the real world at this point for what a lot of Meta was trying to provide with Oculus. They're still seemingly going to do that, like Camouflage, which is the Batman Arkham developer. Like they are still around and they're still probably going to make another VR game and it's still probably going to be pretty good, but 10% is not like a death knell for it, but it is a sign like we don't give a frick about this anymore. If we truly and utterly cared about it as much as we said we did, enough to change our company's name to it, we would be investing more in it. We would not be taking funds away from it. Which if you have been watching the Meta area of that company for a while, it has been bleeding cash for years. Literally billions. Literally has been bleeding billions of dollars for years since inception, which like that's most tech startups, right? Is you put a lot of money into something and then eventually it finally catches on and you make all that money back later. Most tech investments are a red investment initially and they become black. Like that was Netflix for decades, not decades, but for like a decade. It was like Netflix never made a profit. And then eventually it started making
money and money and money and money and more money, and now it's just passive income, millions and millions of dollars passive income for an entire company, which is great. So like a lot of companies in the tech space see a long-term vision, and that is exactly what Meta was banking on. And it really does seem like, well, now we have this whole AI thing, and the wearables are clearly way more successful now than VR is. I don't know. I think we're just going to pivot to that. I think we're going to commit to that. And that sounds like tech, right? It's not the first time that Meta has even done that. It's not the first time any big tech company has done that. Google is infamous for it, buying or investing heavily in a product, and then completely abandoning it within like a year. At least Meta gave it a little bit more time than a year. Like Google abandons things super fast. I think Meta or Facebook originally had like a cell phone. They were trying to make a cell phone or something. I don't remember. It was something crazy. It was something like, well, of course that's not going to work. And of course, like they abandoned it within a very short amount of time. But anyway, I think the problem here, the main emphasis of this whole thing, I love VR, I love talking about it, but the main problem here is Facebook or Meta is basically they have a monopoly on VR. I'm not going to say a monopoly, but they are the main. They have established themselves as really the main VR platform, and they're signaling very quickly, oh, we're not really going to do much with this anymore. We're really kind of abandoning it. Really kind of giving up on it. And that's a problem. That's a problem for the VR space in general, because if you don't have this massive benefactor promoting this technology and trying to advance this technology, it's going to die. It's going to die, and it's going to be really sad when we had all this potential in this potential technology to make video games great, and we just never got there because Meta gave up. And it would be one thing if they just never went all in on it and bought up the biggest VR hardware manufacturer and bought up some of the biggest like VR studios to make video games for them. It would have been one thing if they had left it alone and they said, we're going to let the VR market play out on its own and advance on its own, and it's going to advance way slower, but we're going to come back in and try to take a stab at it when the technology is advanced significantly and we're good with it. We're confident with it. They didn't do that. They jumped in. They bought the only mother effer who is really going to have a shot at it, at making it mainstay, and they're going to kill him. And that's so disappointing. It's nothing. I mean, I don't like Facebook as a company, so like, I'm not defending anything they've ever done or ever will do because I don't like it. But this is really depressing for me as a gamer and as somebody who really did believe in VR and still does believe in VR. I think it's still a long ways off, to be frank. Like, there's so much that has to happen before this becomes a real and true mainstay thing. But I want it to be at some point, maybe one day, but we're just not there yet. So a very sad development in VR history as we know it. But that's all for the news. That was actually a lot. An hour and 20 minutes into the news. That's pretty good. That's a pretty good news segment. Admittedly, it's been a minute, but there was also a lot to unpack in a lot of those stories. So glad that I got into it. That was fun. So on to impressions. And on this episode, we have the ever so interestingly titled Death Stranding 2 on the Beach, which of course makes it sound like you're watching like a beach special of something, but it of course makes sense within the context of the game because everything in Kojima's games have weird naming conventions that make things sound weird, but they're actually not within the lore. So, anyways, Death Stranding 2, right? I mean, everybody loves Kojima. He's considered, or Hideo Kojima, if you aren't familiar, I should say, is the creator of Metal Gear Solid. He's very well known for being one of the most inventive, wacky, and auteur, almost artsy minds in the video game sphere. I think if anybody was like, who is the Steven Spielberg of video game directing, I think most people would probably look at Hideo Kojima. He's known for making
really good movie, almost movie quality games. His direction is always really interesting and insightful, and he takes different approaches to a lot of different things. And that is no different in Death Stranding 1, which I have a very, very strong connection with. It is probably the only thing that has ever made me go like, this is art. Like, I understand what art is now. Like, I've always been one of those people that looks at like a museum, an art museum or something, and I'm like, yeah, that's a picture on a wall. Like, that's what? I don't care what that is. Yeah, it's Jesus or something. Cool. I saw that at church when I was a kid. I get it. Like, I've never been that much of an artsy guy. But Death Stranding was the first thing that made me go like, I understand that most of this does not make sense. But to me, somehow it does. Somehow it touched something deep down in my soul, and I understand what art is now, which is the craziest thing I've ever said in my entire life. But Death Stranding made it happen. So when Death Stranding 2 was announced, I said, what the frick are we doing here? Why are we making a Death Stranding 2? Who asked for Death Stranding 2? And then it got really good reviews. It's a 90 on OpenCritic right now. One of the highest reviewed games of the year. People are giving it Games of the Year awards. It's one of the top contenders for Game of the Year outside of Clair Obscur. And I said, well, I guess I'm going to have to play it. Clearly, Kojima is up to his old tricks again. He's made another great game. However, I actually have a bit more of a divisive opinion, which is kind of insane considering the first game was so divisive. The first game was not reviewed super well. It was reviewed fine. Low 80s, I think, was where it ended up landing. But it was a lot of people saying this game's boring. I don't like it. It doesn't make sense. The gameplay isn't very fun, and that is all warranted, I think. It's totally understandable to me. So Death Stranding, if you aren't familiar, is a package delivery game. You are delivering packages in a post-apocalyptic world in an almost realistic way. Like if you stumble over a rock, you will fall, you will lose your packages, they will become damaged, and you will have to pick them back up, and you will have to continue walking a very long distance to deliver your packages. That is basically the entire gameplay loop of Death Stranding, and it returns in Death Stranding 2. One of the main features of Death Stranding is the chiral network. So once you deliver a package to an area, a certain chunk of the map becomes available on the chiral network. And essentially what that means is other players from all around the world can start helping you. So for instance, if a character or a player in somewhere else around the world in that exact location left their truck or left their motorcycle or whatever the case is, or dropped a piece of equipment, you can pick it up and you can use it. Or you can get in that car and you can start driving somewhere. And so it's much easier than walking. Or if somebody made a road for you to traverse on so you don't have to worry about stumbling over things, you can drive on that road, and so on and so forth. Essentially, the main conceit of the game is everybody is working together to try and make delivering these packages, which is inherently difficult, much easier. So a lot of the game is you go and deliver a package, and then you open the chiral network, and then you have to go to another area. So like half of the delivery is on the chiral network because you've put that piece of the map on the chiral network and you're getting help. And then you move into like an area that's not on the chiral network. And that's where things get a little treacherous. And you kind of have to utilize your skills as a deliverer and deal with all these hardships to finally get over there and establish the chiral network. And now things are okay. It's fine now. You're all working together. Everything's hunky-dory, right? Peachy keen. So that's kind of the loop. Death Stranding 1. Death Stranding 2, interestingly enough, very similar. In fact, there's not much different about it from the exact, description I just gave in terms of gameplay, but there are additions, there are changes. Obviously, the story is very different, the map is very different. There's a lot of things that change, and we're going to get into it. So, starting off, Death Stranding 2 is actually set shortly after the first game, and it follows Sam Porter Bridges, who is played by Norman Reedus. This game has a lot of big Hollywood faces. Guillermo del Toro, the director of, some would remember him as the director of Pan's Labyrinth and a million other things. He is in this game as a character, like a fairly prominent character. He's in the first game as well. George Miller is in this game. My wife came up and watched me play it for a time, and she was like, "Oh yeah, I know all those people. They're all big Hollywood celebrities." And I don't really know Hollywood celebrities that much, so I was like, "Oh, okay, I trust you." She's like, "Oh yeah, that's Elle Fanning. She's Sleeping Beauty in the new Disney movies." I'm like, "I didn't freaking know that, but that's cool that he's getting all these Hollywood actors." So a lot of big names in the show, or in this. It's very easy to call it a show or a movie, but in the game. But he is trekking across all of Australia to connect the world after a significant hardship in his life. So he's trying to recover from this grief that he feels over losing someone special to him. And the game truly feels like a sequel in a lot of ways. It improves on a lot of things that the first game did. Here's the problem. The problem is that I don't know if it ties all the themes that I think made the first game so compelling. And I feel like I really need to delve into that, because it's, the first game, it focuses a lot on coming together. Everybody's working together. We're all happy. But in this one, the themes are a little bit more out there. And because the first game was art, it's hard for me to be like, well, you're wrong for not wanting those things or not continuing those things or liking those things, because it's freaking art. And I'm not going to say somebody's stupid for not understanding art, because people have told me that for decades and I don't appreciate it. So I'm not going to say that. And I don't even agree with that. But I do think that if you appreciated the theming of the first game, that you're certainly not going to be satisfied with this one, because I think it's really taken a back seat. So the first game is one I would not generally recommend. To me, it's art, not entertainment. It's not really meant to be fun. It's designed to make you feel, convey certain themes, and it's not often actually trying to be fun in a lot of ways. It's trying to be a difficult, slogging experience that you're earning a lot of the game. You're having to make, it's trying to produce a reaction out of you that I don't think Death Stranding 2 is trying to. I think Death Stranding 2 steps away from this in a lot of ways. And I think that the game is more designed around being a fun experience, which I think obviously a lot of people would appreciate. And I think it's kind of hard for me objectively to fault it for that. But the game has a way bigger emphasis on combat. It now actually feels really well done, like MGS5. MGS5 is known for having really well done combat, really fleshed out mechanics and everything. It feels like you're playing an alternate version of Death Stranding, or not Death Stranding 5, Metal Gear Solid 5, which is an incredible compliment. The game gives you ample amount of tools to handle the game in any real way that you like. A lot of player freedom in here. I'm going to get into that in a bit. And the story is far less abstract and emotional than the first game, in my personal opinion. I think the first game is way more out there, way more, like I said, artsy, and this game is really almost trying to tell a very direct story. Like a lot of the big reveals and a lot of the things that happen that make this game's story memorable, I wouldn't consider to be artsy. They're more so just like well-told story beats, which is not the same in my opinion. All the things together make this game feel much more compelling, and I would recommend it to just about anyone. There's something here for everybody, but for me, it took away that oomph that I really wanted from Death Stranding 2, which was that emotional, artistic experience that really resonated with me and tried to convey something interesting in themes that I thought were interesting. Something different, basically. This feels like a lot more of like Metal Gear Solid 5, And I feel like Death Stranding 1 is like a really unique, on the nose experience that tries to convey something and do something in a very specific way, and it succeeds. To your mileage may vary, admittedly, but like Death Stranding 2 is more like, yeah, we're in it to really just have a good time. And like that's cool, but it's not what I wanted, right? So like that's what makes it such a difficult conversation for me to have, and I'm going to try to get into it as to why I feel that way. But a lot of it is like, dang, that first game is so special to me, and this game I feel like takes away a lot of what makes that so special, but replaces it with something that's going to make it a lot more palatable to everybody else. So it makes sense, right? Hopefully, we'll get into that. So, to get it back on track a little bit, I still heavily enjoyed the game. You know, it didn't hit me as hard as Death Stranding 1 did, but there are still a few flaws I can't quite forgive in Death Stranding 2, but in no way are like harsh criticisms. Hopefully, I've kind of been conveying that. To frame all of this game is a 90 on OpenCritic, which is kind of crazy considering the first game is so divisive. And this one scored significantly higher than the first one. I see people still referencing it for Game of the Year, and all those things surprise me and don't at the same time. To elaborate, let's talk about the good. There's plenty. There's a lot to love about this game. I think this game's opening 10 hours or so is amazing. To me, it's basically the satisfying gameplay loop of difficult slogging deliveries in Death Stranding 1 in a much more compact time frame. The first Death Stranding, I think, took me about 40 hours to complete. The second one did as well. But I feel like I got that exact same, like, you go from sucking at deliveries to, like, you are very capable at delivery by the 10-hour mark in Death Stranding 1. You really just explode in how the game paces it comparative to the first game. The game throws you into the deep end super fast, with it forcing heavy combat missions on you and even massive boss battles that either were never encouraged in the first game or just rarely happened. Everybody seems to emphasize that when they talk about this game. Like, you're really never meant to fight anybody in Death Stranding 1. You're really supposed to avoid combat at all costs, and it's a really last-ditch thing. In this game, you are very early on, like mission 3 in this game, maybe even mission 2, they're like, bro, you need to go into this base and you need to kill everybody. Sam, there is no way around this. We're going to have to murder everyone in this base. And you're not actually murdering them. You're like tranquilizing them. But it's like, we need you to go into this base and just take out everybody, dude. Just do your best to just take out everything. And like, that's so different than what you would have seen in Death Stranding 1. Same thing with boss battles. Boss battles are pretty, I'm not going to say regular in this game, but they're much more regular than they were in Death Stranding 1, which like had a boss battle like once every quarter. There are like 4 boss battles in the game. It's very rare. In this game, it's like you'll just run into a boss battle in the open world if you're not careful. Like you can easily just run into a boss just in the middle of nowhere. But it gives you a lot of super valuable equipment very early on in the game. First game drip feeds you a lot of stuff. A lot of the best items really only come very late in the game. I remember zip lines being something that was like, holy frick, that was like a last couple of hours of the game kind of thing. And it was like a massive improvement if you could get them to work. And in this game, it's like, nah, dude, like you're like halfway through the game, you can have zip lines. Like that's like a late game item in Death Stranding 1. It's like you have pretty much your entire arsenal by halfway through the game, no doubt, in Death Stranding 2. So, you're not having to suffer for a very long time in this game. You're very capable, very fast in this. On top of that, because you are so limited in your delivery options in the very beginning of the game, missions are a bit more linear, which gives you a more of the ability to force an interesting scenario and having to force you to react. For example, one of my favorite moments in the whole game was when I was forced through this narrow canyon, and all of a sudden a freaking meteor shower comes down and catches the entire valley on fire. And so I obviously was not prepared for that. That had never happened in any of the games, in Death Stranding 1 or 2, and nothing had really indicated that was going to happen. And you have to just adapt. It's like, I hope you came prepared, because now you are freaking going to have to deal with this bull crap. And like I love moments like that in games, especially if you're totally, able to handle it. There's, you can balance that for sure. It can be a problem, but I think in a lot of games, if you throw me in a situation like that, especially in like strategy games, strategy and tactics games, where you do that to me, I think that's really actually kind of fun and cool. But like Valkyria Chronicles is one that definitely comes to mind that does that to people like a lot throughout the game. But I thought that was really cool, and there are a lot of missions like that in the first like 10 or so hours, right? Because there you don't have the ability to just hop in a truck and drive around it. Like you have to engage with it because you do not have any other equipment that will help you outside of that. So, continuing on, the game gives you a lot of freedom to do whatever you want. You want to stealth it? Fine. You want to, take an alternate route? You can take whatever route you want. What equipment do you want? You have so much, so varied. There are so many different ways to tackle every situation. It feels way more open in the first game, and I often felt like there was no easy option to get it done in the first game. Like it was always going to be a really difficult task to get anything done at any point. In this game, it's like, honestly, how do you want to get it done? Because you can get it done, and there are easier ways than others, but like you can certainly, everything in front of you is certainly surmountable. In the first game, I felt like that was not the case. The freedom is something that I think most people are going to applaud. They're going to love this thing, but it hindered my enjoyment significantly, but not in any way I can say like was the game's fault. And so let me get into that. Basically, about 12 to 15 hours into the game, you get a truck. You have the ability to drive basically anywhere. Your packages won't fall out. Like you're pretty much safe from everything. And the game came to an absolute screeching halt for me. Okay, so now we're starting to get into the negatives, right? The truck was so OP that I never saw a need to use anything else. I could either run away, I could go around, or I could go pretty much through or around any obstacle. If you get caught by a BT, you just keep driving. Okay, you're good. You don't have to worry about that anymore. If you hit a mountain, it's like, okay, well, I can literally drive around it. Like that was pretty much my emphasis to, or my approach to any problem once I got to that truck. It was like, yeah, I can really do whatever the frick I want because it's really easy for me to just completely go around. And I say this, since the game story is really, or excuse me, and since the game story is really what I was most interested in, I felt the true reward of the game is to try and take the path least of resistance, So what I'm sorry, I'm reading off of my notes. I'm reading off of my notes, and that was not very well said. So essentially what I was trying to say in the past when I wrote these notes is I think there's two things in Death Stranding 2 and 1, technically, really the gameplay loop incentivizes. One is your story progression, seeing those awesome cutscenes and learning more about this world and its characters is a huge incentive, which is obviously what you're going to be doing at the end of every delivery, right? And then also those really satisfying slogging deliveries, you finally get to the other side and you're like, oh my gosh, you breathe that sigh of relief. You finally made it. You've overcome this giant trek that was in front of you, this insurmountable task. You finally surmounted it, right? Don't say I like Dark Souls because I don't. But in this game, I never felt that way because the insurmountable task is gone because I can drive around it, and I think the game's story kind of dries up pretty quick. So like I essentially turned this game into a really boring driving game for like 25 to 30 hours. I think the first 10 hours of the game is great in terms of its game design. I think the last 10 hours of the game is great because that's when all the story actually happens. And then you have this 20-hour chunk in the middle where I'm like, yo, this is boring as frick. It reminded me of playing GTA 4. GTA 4 I hated because I just felt like I was just driving around a boring open world and I was being punished for driving poorly all the time. I think you actually get punished driving poorly more in GTA 4 than you do in Death Stranding 2. But either way, like I don't know. It's one of those things that I think you're gonna try to take the path of least resistance when doing this because that's the challenge, right? If you're telling me this is a really hard delivery and you give me all these tools to make it easier, why would I not choose the easiest possible solution? Why would I choose the harder one? Because they're all supposed to be hard, right? So I don't know. You're giving me these tools to make it really easy, and you can. So it just felt at odds with what I think a lot of what Death Stranding 1 was trying to do. It's now not incentivized at all in 2, right? Combat is now heavily incentivized. Basically, Death Stranding 1 never wanted you to engage with enemies. Combat feels good, but in combination with the boring delivering missions, it ultimately made me feel like I wanted the game to just be another action game. Why isn't Kojima making another Metal Gear? It seems like he wants to, because this game feels like a Metal Gear Solid game. Death Stranding 1 committed to the idea, like, we don't want you to do these things. We want you to do this a specific way. And Death Stranding 2 seems to shy away from it a bit. Makes it a lot more palatable. But I do think that overall, the themes of the game, it's hard to complain. Or for the themes of the game, I think it hurts. But for the overall product, I think it's hard to complain about it. So that kind of the themes. Let's talk about the story. The game's story. One I was ultimately satisfied with, okay? So at the end of it all, I was cool with this, but also one that I felt did not need to be made. For the entirety of the game, I was like, I really felt like Death Stranding 1 had a nice story, a good beginning, middle, and end. It wrapped up a universe for me. I really didn't need more from this, and it seems like this game never really justified its existence, in my opinion. Like, I didn't need an extension to Sam's story. It felt complete to me. And in this, I think Death Stranding 2 seems to fumble with the themes. It doesn't really know how to convey a lot of the themes that it's trying to, and it seems to offer a lot of backtracking on what the original game's themes were. So I wasn't too keen on that for like a long stretch of the game. To preface everything that I'm about to get into, this is, in terms of story and presentation, this is a very Kojima game, okay? If you have played a Metal Gear Solid game, you know exactly what that means. He has a very distinct style, but that comes with a lot of baggage. So this game is unnecessarily complex and obtuse. There are a million... I had to go back and I had to revitalize my memory on what everything was in this game. Like, what the frick is a Death Stranding? What is a beach? What is a this, that, and the other? There's a million and one terms that are really complicated and really could have been much easier to understand. And Kojima just doesn't want you to do that. He wants you to work with his like entire mentality of what these things are and how these things work and blah, 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 blah. Like, really, if you really wanted to, the beach, that's just the afterlife. That's what happens when somebody dies. You go to the beach. Why we had to call it that, why we had to say it was that, I don't know. But that's what it freaking is. And that's about 90% of the terminology in this game, and you just have to deal with it. Sometimes this game is just weird because it just freaking feels like it. One of the most memorable moment in this game is like during one of the most serious moments of the game, there just is a dance number. They just break out into song. The song has nothing to do with what is going on. It is a goofy dance number, and as soon as it's over, it is played like it did not happen. It is played completely straight. It's like, what the frick is going on here? That is just Kojima. It is what he does. But everything is completely and incredibly well made. It's all very compelling. You can always tell that there is a hint of genius behind what is going on, no matter what is going on. This guy is one of those guys that I think you will never be able to have a conversation about without people being like, well, you just don't get it. You just don't understand the magic that Kojima brings to these games, which I think is probably an overhyped conversation, but at the same time, I kind of agree. I kind of also agree. I am a Kojima defender. So, all that said, the game's main theme, it recurs pretty frequently throughout the game, is the stick versus the rope. So, Do you try to lead people where you want them to believe, into things you want them to believe or do, or do you force them into believing or doing? Because this game has such an emphasis on combat, the game is essentially trying to emphasize, like, well, what would you do? Would you use the stick? Would you use the rope? I do not think this ever goes anywhere. The first game obviously is like you use the rope. You're being nice to everybody. We're all working together, and that's obviously a large part of the mechanics in this game. But there's now a big emphasis on violence and gunplay. Even in cutscenes with the main antagonist, this is often brought up. But I don't believe it was ever fully committed to in any real way in the story. Like, Sam never has to make some big decision of like, well, I don't know, is what I'm doing shooting everybody in the face? Is that like cool? Like, I don't know if that's cool. It really is just like it's brought up but never really fully comes to a commitment to this ideology or this theme. It just for some reason poses the question and then it's just like cool. And I don't think that's a very good way of communicating a theme in any media. It feels like combat was added just to benefit the gameplay as a whole, and then like they kind of tried to work in a theme around that. And it's like I don't think they really felt like they needed to, but they felt like they had to. But I think this overall compromises what the game was before, which is we're all just working together, and even though things suck, like we still need to work together to make things work. And I've even seen some journalists and people talking about this game and being like, no, this is an allegory for like Republicans, like the Trump administration, and it's an allegory for like you need to fight back. Like even like you can't win every battle by being nice. You have to start freaking killing people. And I'm like, I do not think that this is what that game is trying to communicate at all. After having played the entire game, I think that that theme is never fully incorporated. I do not think there is any kind of allusion to the Trump administration and how that is tying into that and why that is, how you should address Nazis or whatever the frick you think the Trump administration is. I don't think that is exactly how this game is trying to pose its mechanics and its themes. I think it never fully addresses it in any way. There are other themes. Specifically, I mentioned earlier grief and dealing with loss, but for many reasons, a lot of them are spoilers, so I won't get into them. But a large part of it, I don't think these themes even go fully into it and feel very hollow. And a large part of that is because, brother, you have a direct connection to the afterlife. What are we grieving about freaking anything for? Half of the characters that die in this game come back because they're still alive on the beach. And so like that, because that's like the whole thing about the beach is like it's the afterlife. It's where you go when you die. But like you can still kind of be contacted. Like there's still ghosts and like you can still find people on the beach and they still have like a consciousness in a way. And like sometimes they can come back if you connect them enough. It's like, bro, what the frick are we doing trying to be like, yo, grief is a serious thing. We all need to deal with grief in our lives. But like at the same time, it's like, well, nobody in this game really had to grieve at any point because everybody who dies doesn't actually fully die. So it's like, okay, like I don't know if that even is fully delved into as a theme. So I didn't fully buy that either. My main issue with the story. You think, Henry, these themes aren't cool. Okay, you're very pissed at that. But like I don't even think that's like a real problem, right? As long as you tell me, like I think that's a problem in context with Death Stranding 1, which is a game that is heavily thematic and really trying to push specific themes. But I think that in this game, as long as you're telling me a good story, I don't care if there's a lot of themes. Like, I don't care if the art is good as long as you tell me a good story. Like, I think Metal Gear Solid has a good story because I think the action and the character moments are good, I don't necessarily think the themes in Metal Gear Solid are like so crazy and like deep, but I do think that the character moments are well done and well executed. So that's all I really care about. I stopped somebody from taking over the world in Metal Gear Solid. Cool. That's all I really needed, right? I didn't need a grandiose thematic statement over,
world peace or whatever the frick. Like, I don't need that. That's cool, that's there, but I don't necessarily need it. So I'm willing to be like, yeah, the themes of this game weren't that great, but the story could be good. Here's my thing. I actually do think the game has a good story. I'll just go ahead and preface that. I do think that. But I think that this game's the main issue that I had with it that really doubled down on my issue with like the main middle chunk of this game was that this story is drip fed to you. It's drip fed to you over the course of 30 freaking hours. The beginning of the game gets going pretty fast, but like once you've gotten going, this game does not want to go anymore for like 30 hours. The game's narrative is set up pretty well, but then it barely gives you crumbs until like the very end where every reveal happens at once. And I think that's completely unnecessary. I think the reveals are done well and ultimately enjoyed the story, but I went from saying there's no way that they can make this worth it, which I should not be saying that like at the last 5 hours of your game. Like, oh man, I really feel like this story sucked. But then they ended up giving me all the reveals at once and making me go like, no, okay, they made it work. Like, that's actually a pretty satisfying ending. But like making me drudge through so much of a boring story that's drip fed to me, I think is really unfortunate. Speaking of the game's ending, I hear a lot of people talking about how long it is and how it's just like a 15-hour cutscene. I think it's horrifically exaggerated. I heard people legitimately say it was like 3 hours of a nonstop cutscene. And I felt like the ending did not drag on anywhere near compared to what I've seen Kojima do in the past, but that is not saying much. Metal Gear Solid 4 specifically is known for having like literal 5-hour cutscenes, like not unpausable, but like no interaction, just nothing but like a 4-hour cutscene. There is gameplay that breaks up a lot of the cutscenes towards the end of the game, but it's very funny. Even like towards the end of the game literally warns you when it's starting to go into everything. It's like, hey, we're about to have a really long cutscene. Are you cool with that? Are you actually cool with that? Because like it's gonna be a minute. We're gonna be explaining a lot of bull crap at once. And I mean, I appreciate the heads up, but like obviously there should be a better way to tell your story than that. But I never felt it was too egregious. Regardless, I felt the reveals did not justify the runtime of the game. It was obvious the narrative was something that could have likely been communicated in like a movie or two of length. Like really the whole reveal is like probably like a 2-3 hour cutscene, like total. And I think a lot of like the early game narrative could have been comprised down into like an hour of cutscenes. So like you really could have made this like a 4-hour movie or something, and I probably would have been like, yeah, like that makes sense. Like it really didn't need to be that long. But we have a 40-hour gameplay runtime, so you need a lot of gameplay. So you need a lot of bull crap to fill in a little bit of breadcrumbs here and there to fill in that like long, exasperated drought of story, because your narrative really isn't that long and really isn't that complex. I felt like I remember Death Stranding 1 giving you like bursts of story every few chapters. Like you'd go from like one point of the map to the other and you'd meet a new character, and that character would like have something that would expand on the world and how the lore of that world worked, and like how the themes of the game expanded upon like that particular character. I think it was much more satisfying to have the game doled out like that rather than like the breadcrumb trail of Death Stranding 2, which kind of all culminates in like the last 10 hours of the game. What it leaves me feeling is I really loved the last opening and the opening 10 and the final 10 hours of gameplay, I really loved the first 10 hours in terms of gameplay. I really loved the last 10 hours in terms of story. But I felt like the middle 20 hours where I was driving a truck around without much resistance and little story beats for a reward sucked. Like it's still hard for me to hold that 20 hours of boring gameplay against the game because I kind of did it to myself. I could have chosen to walk everywhere
And while I know that, that likely would have been more satisfying because it was very satisfying at the beginning of the game doing that, I also know I probably would have wanted to blow my brains out because it would have taken another, 15 to 20 hours of gameplay to walk instead of driving everywhere because the map is so large. So, I appreciate the devs giving me the tools to play the game how I want, but I also think that you're a fool for not taking the best tools available to you as a player. So, especially when I feel like the whole point of the game is to try to overcome the obstacles that are in front of you in the best way that you can using the tools that you have. Like, why wouldn't I just make the game super easy if you've given me tools to make the game super easy? So, and it's not like I'm turning the game down to easy or anything. I played the entire game on normal, and I think that honestly, your experience in terms of the vast majority of the game is going to be the exact same if you play on super easy or normal, because the only thing that's probably going to change is the combat. So, it it just that is just kind of my summation of the main points of the game, right? I think I need to calm down. There's a million other small things in this game that I could point out, just like any other Kojima project. They're all well done. It's super polished, interesting, funny, bizarre, and unique. And I just know that the main things that I've touched on have been like the heavy bullet points. Like that's the stuff you kind of need to address, right? I could talk about how there's a bunch of Easter eggs in the game that really make the game feel like, almost like a window into Kojima's mind, and like very interesting, and very fun and memorable. But ultimately, this game leaves me in a place where I don't know exactly how to view the game or even how to recommend it. I certainly would recommend it to more people than the first game. Like, it's far less oppressive in terms of gameplay, and it's, there's a lot more gameplay elements that would make it appeal to a wider crowd, specifically like guns, shooting things. People typically enjoy that. It gives the player more freedom to tackle things as they see fit. It has a story and characters that I think would resonate with a wider audience. It's not as obtuse. It's not as artsy. It's a little bit more direct. It looks beautiful. This thing looks probably some of the best graphics I've ever seen in a game ever. It has big Hollywood actors that people are going to enjoy seeing, a wonderful direction, like you're watching a real Hollywood freaking movie. Gunplay feels great, just like Metal Gear Solid 5. It's got well done missions that are throughout the game. I think most of them are in the beginning of the game, but I think you definitely have some sprinkled in throughout the rest of it. I'm not saying the rest of the game sucked. Some of the other missions are still good for sure, and a story that ends up being pretty satisfying emotionally and impactful. So I see how this game was higher reviewed than the first, because a lot of people, it's going to tick off a lot of boxes. Like everything I just said is a plus in this game's favor. But for someone who is actually a really big fan of Death Stranding 1, I found the themes in the story to be pretty lacking. I found the gameplay to give me so much freedom that I ended up, making it too easy and boring. And I found that the pacing of the story almost seemed insultingly drip fed, for a game that has so much emphasis on that, or from a creator that has so much emphasis on that. And to be fair, I can see some people thinking the story was drip fed okay. You do get a little cutscene like after every single thing where you're kind of getting to know your crew a little bit and stuff. I never felt like it was necessary though. And I never felt like I really felt super attached to my crew or the narrative or the characters that I was coming in contact with as I went, throughout the entire game. So you can see how it makes it really hard for me to fully commit to loving this game. I think the first one resonated with me on such an emotional level, so much more, and I got so much more out of it because of that. But this one is objectively a more complete and compelling package to me. I think it is objectively the better game. A game I won't fault people for enjoying, but I also am one that I'm slightly more confused. It isn't more divisive than it is, considering that the first game was so divisive. A lot of those, gameplay mechanics and stuff are still super present here, and I still think people are going to still have problems with it. Even if you, didn't like the first game, you may like this one, but I still think you're going to have to get through a lot of stuff you're not going to like, because a lot of this game is still very delivery focused, and if you don't like how weird and quirky Kojima's stories and characters are, that's all still here too. So it's still interesting that like this is a 90. That's pretty universal praise. Like you don't get many games that hit 90 plus on OpenCritic. It just doesn't happen. So like that means everybody was pretty much on the same page. This game was good, and that's just so weird considering so many people were dogging on the first game and it did not review well. I look forward to whatever Kojima does next, but I would love to just see another action game. Like at this point, my favorite points of this game were all just the action elements, and it made me frustrated that he just didn't commit to something more like that. And he is currently making another Metal Gear Solid clone, basically his own Metal Gear Solid, and I'm heavily looking forward to that now because I'm like, oh yeah, this guy makes incredible action games. I forgot. Like Death Stranding 1 was so cool to me. I forgot that Metal Gear Solid is also an amazing series, and now that it's not under Kojima, or excuse me, Konami, and like he has full creative freedom to do whatever he wants with it. It's like that game is probably going to be so rad, but it made me feel like this game really suffered from him dipping his toes into going back to a more action focused series. And I don't know. At the end of the day, I still loved this game. Like, don't get me wrong. I just felt a lot different about it than I did the first game. I would still give this game an 8.5. I'd probably give it a 9 on a good day. But like I I feel way more close to the narrative and what I experienced in Death Stranding 1. I think Death Stranding 2 is objectively a better package, but I think that it takes away some of the magic that made the first game super good. I still think, like if you're looking for a good game to play and you are interested in it, absolutely give it a shot. It's a good game. It's a great game. But I think my opinions on this game are a little bit more divisive because of how much I loved Death Stranding 1 as a package. I don't think anything here is bad. I don't think anything here is wrong. I just think it's different. And it's a different in a way that makes me a little frustrated that if you're going to do something as bizarre as Death Stranding 1, you should just commit to it. And he did commit to it in 1, and it just feels like it wasn't as big of a commitment in 2, if that makes sense. So I know that was a lot, but that was my thoughts on Death Stranding 2. I hope that was legible. I hope that was understandable. I know I jumped around a good bit there. And I was trying to read off my notes a lot. I had a lot of notes for it. I really didn't want to miss anything here because it really is a difficult conversation around this game because of art. And art is, I don't know how you frickin' do it. How do art majors do it? How do people who make art for a living do it? How do they describe to people? It's really all just marketing, but like when real art resonates, it's really hard to describe why. I don't think it's possible to describe why. And I don't think it's possible to describe why to someone else, certainly. Because it's impossible for something to resonate with you the same way it resonated with them, right? So like, because you're two different people with two different experiences, and art is something that's interpretation based. So you're going to have every person is going to have a different interpretation, a different feeling. Even if some art is meant to convey a specific purpose, it may not for some others. So, it's a very complicated subject. And I'm not used to it either. I'm normally used to appraising things objectively and going through games objectively and appreciating design in an objective sense, in a rational sense. And Death Stranding 1 is literally the only game that I will ever tell you, or I have ever said, maybe not the only I will ever, but the only game I have ever said, this game is art. And it emotionally resonated with me, and I cannot fully explain why. And that's difficult because it puts me in a really difficult place on a podcast where I have to explain why certain things resonated with me in the first game and they didn't with the second. So, I still think the game's great. Still think it's deserving of the praise that it's getting, but it's just a really difficult conversation. But that's going to wrap it. That's going to put a bow on this episode of the Plug in Play podcast. Thank you, friend, for sticking around. I know that this episode, especially the Stranding talk, was probably a little bit different than what I'm used to in terms of producing.
terms of commentary. But I hope that it was okay. I hope you enjoyed. I hope that you're playing some good video games right now, and I hope your year is off to a good start. Like I said, I'm still working hard on getting things, kind of figured out here on the plug and play side, on changing some things up. So stick around. Hopefully it just makes things bigger and better, and maybe somebody gives me a free code to a game someday, and I'll be able to say that, Square Enix gave me a code to Final Fantasy Tactics or something. That would be cool. But that's a long ways off. Anyway, thank you again, friend, for sticking around, and I appreciate you as always. And I will talk to you about video games next time. Bye bye.